just going to share my screen. Let me know if that is not working. Is that working okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right, cool. All right, then I am going to start the slideshow, and then I'm going to adjust you guys on my screen over here so I can still see you. So welcome and good morning. I'm super excited to be here. As Annie said, I'm an associate professor at Michigan State, and I study K-12 educational administration. And my research looks at systematic and culturally responsive ways to improve teaching and learning in K-12 schools. And I will tell you that the research shows that instructional coaching has a huge impact on student learning. So you guys are doing it, you're making it happen, and the kids are benefiting from your hard work, including the days that you spend working on your own professional development like today. So I just wanted to welcome you all. Our focus here is on, let me mention one other thing. I have pink eye right now, both eyes. It originally started in one and spread to the other. And Annie assured me that you all would be very understanding as educators because you've probably seen it or had it yourselves. So I just wanted to put that out there. But anyways, I am talking with you today about asset-based coaching and connecting that to the essentials work. I have been involved in the essentials work since 2016, helping with the first draft of the school-wide and center-wide practices, and then working on the revisions that were done just last year. So here are the outcomes for today. I want you, after about we have an hour and 10 minutes together, and I want you to leave feeling like you understand the research behind asset-based thinking, asset-based pedagogies, and asset-based coaching. And so the focus of this session, the title says asset-based coaching, but you can't really think about asset-based coaching without thinking about asset-based thinking. And in your coaching work, I hope that you're supporting teachers in asset-based pedagogies. So we're going to talk about all three of those and draw some connections between them. And I also want you to walk away with an understanding of how an asset-based perspective connects to the literacy essentials and the organizational practices essentials. And along the way, you're also going to develop strategies for using these insights to enhance your own coaching practice with educators. And here's how that will work. I'm going to start by connecting asset-based perspectives to the essentials. And then I'm going to talk about asset-based thinking. And then I'll pause and give you time to strategize. How would I use what we've just been talking about? And I'll give you about 4 minutes to just brainstorm on your own. Then I'll talk a bit about asset-based pedagogies. And then again, I'll pause and give you about 4 minutes to strategize for yourself. Then we'll talk about asset-based coaching, pause for you to strategize for yourself. And then I'm going to repeat what I said at the outset about the connections to the essentials, because once everything's fresh in your mind, I'm going to draw those connections again. You should have a tool that looks like this. This is your note-taking tool that Annie and her team have shared with you. On the left-hand column, you're going to take notes while I'm talking and I'm showing videos and those kinds of things, just kind of like jotting down what you heard, why you think it's important, and how you see it connected to the instructional practices. Actually, the prompt on the left side is a little bit different on each page of your notes. And then on the right is where you brainstorm some strategies during those 4-minute pauses. And so you should have 3 pages here because I will pause 3 times. So that's for you to kind of capture your thinking as we go through the session. So first up, asset-based perspectives in the essentials. So I'm going to talk about 2 documents. One is the instructional practices K-3 for early literacy, and the other is the organizational practices, the revised document from 2022, which is school-wide and center-wide practices in literacy and math, pre-K and elementary. So first up in the K-3 literacy essentials, at the front of the document are the enabling conditions. And it says that the use of these practices should occur in a school day that's supportive and effective for children, not only in literacy, but all areas of development. And then outlines a couple of examples of conditions that help children to thrive in all subjects. And the very first bullet is an asset orientation toward children and their families and communities. So that's something I really want you to get your mind around today. You probably have prior experience working with this concept, but I'm hoping that we can sharpen your understanding during our time together today. And then if you go down 3 more bullets, you'll see another enabling condition is culturally relevant, responsive, and sustaining pedagogical approaches throughout the day. And collectively, culturally relevant, culturally responsive, and culturally sustaining pedagogy are considered asset pedagogies. So I'll be talking a bit about that today. And you can see the other bullets are also important: positive relationships, healthy identity development, and sufficient time for physical activity, meals, and play. But we're going to focus today on those ones that are underlined in red. In essential number 1, under the K-3 literacy essentials, which it delights me that motivation and engagement are essential number 1, because my research focuses on student engagement in schools along with student learning. And you can see, I'm just going to focus your attention on the parts that are underlined in red. But under the first bullet, the teacher incorporates diverse texts and authors that allow children to see people who are like them in various ways, see that people who are like them can be successful authors. So it is important for kids, as they're thinking about identity development and culturally responsive pedagogy, that kids see people who are like them. 2 lines down, you see there's opportunities for kids to collaborate with peers. Collaboration is part of culturally responsive practices. There are many cultures that are very collaborative in nature and community oriented. So working with peers is very natural for a lot of kids. In the top right-hand column, the teacher helps establish purposes for children to read, write, and discuss in and out of school. A couple of the ways they do that are to address community needs and to draw on and affirm their identities. And both of those pieces, remember, we're focusing on motivation and engagement here, are engaging for many students, particularly, as I said, there are some cultures where community is very, very central. And so addressing community needs, being able to be a contributor to the community is really important and engaging for many kids. And also for all kids, drawing on and affirming their identities, whoever they are. So thinking about reasons to read and write and talk about literacy that have those purposes is very engaging and culturally responsive. And then in that last one, additional strategies to generate excitement, including child-centered activities like incorporating children's interests, involving children in classroom management decisions, engaging them in creating a positive learning environment. Again, being able to contribute to the community in the classroom is very engaging for kids, and it's asset-centered to think about who am I, what can I bring, how can I participate in making decisions. All of those things are really important for helping kids feel like a key part of the community. And so these are important things to be focusing on with teachers as you're helping them think about asset-based features of their kids. And then in the essential practices for the school-wide and center-wide, essential number 2 focuses on the organizational climate. And it says an organizational climate reflects a collective sense of responsibility for all children, a focus on developing child independence and competence, and support for the learning of all children and adults. And then if we look at the parts that are underlined in red, we're saying that all adults throughout the organization, in the first bullet, share and act upon a sense of collective responsibility for the literacy and math growth and overall well-being of every child, that's grounded in the shared belief that every child can and will be successful. So first, in that part, if you believe every child can be successful, you see that they have assets, they have strengths. On the second part, underlined there, it's grounded in or draws upon assets from children's families, communities, cultures, and identities. And notice that there's 4 places that the assets are coming from: a child's family, their community, their culture, and then their individual identity. So things that they personally bring. And so we want to be encouraging teachers to find those things. And we'll look at an example of how one teacher does this. And then in the second column, support the development of children's independence, self-competence, self-efficacy, and identity in reading, writing, and math through practices like helping children identify and build on their academic strengths and providing specific feedback to help children grow. And as we'll talk about asset-based thinking today, when you are helping somebody to grow in a new area, you are doing that by building on their strengths. So you can't begin to do that until you've helped to identify their strengths. And it's not just enough for the teacher to know the strengths or for you as a coach to know a teacher's strengths. The individual person also has to see those. And that's part of why it is motivating to help people learn by building on their strengths. And in that next bullet down, promoting authentic engagement and rigor among culturally and linguistically diverse students by building culturally sustaining and responsive learning environments. So you can see that throughout the essentials, there are references to asset-based thinking and asset-based pedagogies. And so my time with you today is helping you just kind of get honing your thinking around those areas and making sure that they're at the forefront of your mind as you go into your coaching work over the coming months. So first up, let's get clear on what asset-based thinking is. To do this, I'm going to show you 2 videos. The first is Travian Shorters, who is a philanthropist, and here he's talking about the power of asset framing. And then we're going to go straight into a video that shows asset framing in practice that portrays teacher Angela Daniel and her student Daniel Boyd, and they'll be talking about how she helps Daniel to recognize his assets and what that means for him. So once again, if you've got your note-taking tool, this is a great time to be jotting down some thoughts as you watch these videos.
Asset framing is about not defining people by their challenge, right? So once you recognize that I aspire to be a scientist or a leader, or maybe I just aspire to graduate high school, like I have a goal to be a student, right? Whatever that aspiration is, if you acknowledge that aspiration before you go into my various challenges, you're telling a truer story about me, right? I don't run around believing I'm an at-risk this or a low-income that or a high poverty, high crime. Like no one carries around those labels thinking that's how I'm going to face the world, right? What people think about is I want to maybe go to school. I want to maybe someday own a home. I want to maybe possibly get out of this neighborhood or come back to this neighborhood and build. Whatever that person's aspiration is, if you haven't bothered to acknowledge that aspiration before you engage them, then you've made them an object in the sentence. They are a thing to be dealt with, to be moved, to be manipulated. They are not a person. And once you start to engage people as obstacles, once you start engaging people as problems, then recognize that you now become the problem, right?
If you're in 9th or 10th grade and you are not a proficient reader, you have been told many, many, many times, possibly every day of your educational life, what you're not good at. They're pretty good, by the way. 9th and 10th graders are great at listing their deficits to you. I don't want to give them any more ammunition in that effort. And I think if kids are sitting in a class where they feel like there's something broken in me or there's some aspect of failure in me, the likelihood that they're going to be brave in that ambiguous space is none. They have no reason to be brave. They've been told that they shouldn't be somehow. And a deficit mindset is a great way to teach a kid too, not to try anything outlandish or creative or new. What does it mean when you get yelled at home or something bad happens and then you come to school in that space? What do you think that does to your learning? It affects it. Is it your fault that it affects it? No, it's not. I have a student, Daniel, who is tremendously courageous. He's a young, tall, mixed race young man that already comes with a package of beliefs and biases and all the things. He has a very strong sense of his own boundaries, which I believe is a huge asset for him. But if you are a person like a teacher or an administrator who is looking for acquiescence and immediate smiling compliance, you may see that as non-compliance or disrespect or something like that. Whereas that could not be farther from the truth. But on top of that, it can talk to almost anyone at any level, at any time. And it's mostly because he has this fantastic way of not judging people, and he can just like be receptive to conversation. And so using that strength and like calling his attention to that strength, I said, you have this strength. And then he's like, yeah. And I said, but you know that. And he goes, that's because you tell me every day.
I'm Daniel Boyd II. I'm named after my dad. I want to eventually be a lawyer. That's my favorite teacher, Miss Daniel. Like whenever I'm down, she was always the first one to bring me up and lift me.
It's very important to him to feel an emotional connection to his teachers and administrators. He has to trust you before he's going to do his best work. because, and this is where the deficit mindset definitely came in, I believe, is that he was very timid to try new things and to really stretch himself to that rigorous level that where he'd have to think in ways that he wasn't used to thinking.
She's the type of teacher is like, she comes and she'll talk to you, and like, even if she knows you understand it, she'll still come to you and make sure 100% that you understand. And so she understands that you understand. It's more relaxed and calm. And I find it way more understanding than any other class would be.
My dad used to say, if you ever want something out of a child, accuse them of it first. And I live my whole teaching career this way. So as soon as I see sort of a nugget of brilliance in them, they get accused of it a lot. And it's reiterated a lot. The minute you say, what's that student's deficit, I immediately think of numbers and data, but that has nothing to do with him as a human being or what he brings to my classroom, the value that he bestows on any group that he's a part of. How you want to frame your own thoughts in your head have a lot to do with how much you get out of a student or how a student feels about you. So I can't control a lot of things, but what I can control is what I'm thinking about a student. I know that student's a great leader. I know that student's a great listener. Like, I know that he's going to listen to me, and I know that she's going to be able to draw, and I know that he's going to be able to write all the text out. There's no student in my class that's not accused of something really exceptional. But I would say that's probably my most fun way of using a strengths mindset. And it's probably one of the ways that the kids respond to best. And it's always really sad when one of them will say, no one's ever told me that, or, and you're like, I just want you to hear every single day that you do these amazing things and bring all this value to the space that you're in. Anyway, it's the fun part of my job.
Okay. There's a couple of great comments in the chat already, but I'm going to ask everybody to contribute something to the chat. What are some assets you have identified in young students you've worked with, and how did you let them know you saw these assets? Somebody made a comment that they wish we had all teachers have the mindset of Angela, who we just saw, and part of your job is to help them do that. So if you can think back to how you've done that, that would be helpful. I'm just going to be quiet for about 3 minutes and we can watch what's going by, and I will share the link to the videos at some point. I'm seeing people recognizing students' hard work, their persistence, their creativity, their kindness, their leadership, their listening skills, their empathy, their compassion, their kindness, their critical thinking, their enthusiasm, their world knowledge, selflessness, determination, number smart, brave to take a risk, thinking out of the box, ability to motivate others. I think these are really inspiring things that you've found in young kids. And I think it's an important reminder that we need to help every teacher see kids that way. And it can be really hard when you've got that kid that's a bit challenging to work with to focus on their strengths. But I think when you do, you not only reframe them for yourself and for that child, but also for their classmates, which can be really important as well. I agree, Reva. I love all of them too. A leader, an artist, somebody having a growth mindset, being mature. All right, thank you for sharing. Those are all really powerful. I'm going to talk a little bit about why asset-based thinking is engaging for kids at school. So I'm going to take you a little bit into the psychological research on motivation and engagement to do this. So first up, motivation are the interrelated beliefs and emotions that influence and direct behavior. So I'm going to say that again. Interrelated beliefs and emotions that influence and direct behavior. So we've been talking about helping students think about themselves in positive ways and see their strengths. And that contributes directly to their interrelated beliefs and emotions that could influence their behavior. So a student who checks out in class or doesn't want to participate most likely is having some negative beliefs about themselves and emotions that are causing those actions. And that's part of their motivation that underlies their engagement. Another way to think about motivation is that it's the reason behind an individual's level of engagement in an activity. And it includes their thoughts, their goals, their beliefs, their emotions. And again, if you're thinking about how students see themselves in positive ways, those thoughts, goals, beliefs, and emotions are directly shaped by how they think about who they are. And we know that motivation impacts engagement. And so if you think about the difference between these two, motivation is really kind of the underlying drive for why you would engage in a particular moment. And engagement is an in-the-moment experience of being behaviorally, emotionally, and cognitively immersed in an activity. So behaviorally means you're doing what the teacher wants you to do. Emotionally, you're enjoying it, you're curious, you're interested, it's fun, you're enjoying the challenge of doing whatever the task is. And cognitively means that you're thinking about it. So you can imagine students being on task, but not being emotionally or cognitively engaged. So when we think about student engagement, we're thinking about all three of those pieces: behavioral, emotional, and cognitive. And the reason a kid engages during an activity is based on their motivation for doing it. And the research in psychology basically talks about 3 psychological factors that impact whether a person, a human, is motivated and engaged in anything. And they are a sense of competence and control, that I can do this, values and goals that make you want to do the activity, and a sense of social connectedness, like I belong here. And I think it's useful to think about this in an out-of-school context. So if you think of yourself in something you do, maybe you play soccer on a local league and you feel good, like you're good at soccer. That makes you want to participate. It aligns with your values and goals, maybe being social, keeping in shape, enjoying being outside, that you want to be doing it, and a sense of belonging with the other people on your team or in the community that plays soccer where you are. And so if all those things are more true, the more engaged you are. If for some reason you felt like you didn't see any value in it, you didn't feel like you were good at it, or you didn't feel like you fit in with the people, you'd be less inclined to go. And all of that also applies in school. So we'll talk about each one a little more. Competence and control is the perception of having the capacity, strategic knowledge, and agency required for success. So imagine it's a math lesson. And if you feel like, okay, I can do this, I'm good at math. I have the strategic knowledge, meaning the teacher has explained it in a way that I can be successful. And then the agency, like I can direct my own learning. If I'm confused, I know where to go to ask a question. I know how to use trial and error to solve a problem. So that sense of competence and control contributes to whether or not a person feels motivated and engaged to do something. And this is partly why, if you've ever observed a teacher who doesn't explain something clearly, kids are not particularly engaged. That's the strategic knowledge piece. I have to know what you want me to do in order to feel competent at it. But I also have to believe that I'm generally good at this. And so that's something we want to help kids build. In terms of values and goals, it's the feeling of wanting to learn about something or the feeling of wanting to achieve because you see a reason to do so. Sometimes in high school, kids are motivated, engaged because they want to get into a good college, or they want to please their parents, or they want to be able to be on the basketball team and keep their grades up. That's good, but we would really prefer that they also are engaged because they want to understand history or science or math, or engage with reading in a deep and meaningful way. But when people's values and goals are more aligned with the task, they're more motivated and engaged. And finally, that social connectedness is the feeling of having secure interpersonal relationships in a particular context. So feeling like you're connected to the teacher and also to the peers. Those are both really important. And I included with my resources today a 2000 article from Osterman on the importance of belonging in the school community. That is a resource you might be interested in. So when all three of those things are true to a greater extent, a person is more engaged. So if you think about it, I'm going to ask you to put us an idea in the chat. Why do you think asset-based thinking in schools supports student engagement? There's a connected element of somebody recognizing your value. There's a sense of being seen and heard, a sense of purpose, gives people a sense of agency. They develop a direct personal connection to the content. They feel joy, ownership, and confidence, feeling a part of something, feeling that they matter, and it helps defeat a deficit mindset. All right, moving on. I'm going to give you 4 minutes now to brainstorm in the right-hand column of your note tool some specific ways you are drawing upon or could drawing upon assets from children's families, communities, cultures, and identities in your work with teachers and students. You have 4 minutes to reflect. If you have a birthday in October, please add one thought to the chat based on your brainstorm. Thank you. October birthdays. All right, thank you to those October birthday people who've added some ideas to the chat. I encourage everyone to have a look at those and see if there's anything there you want to add to your own brainstorm list. There's some great ideas. I like the one about having students reflect on the purpose of an assignment in terms of their unique life and future dreams. I think that's something we often don't do enough with the young kids, is helping them see the purpose for what they're learning. Using student interests and goals to help build asset thinking for teachers and students. And Patty really likes the idea mentioned earlier about identity maps. So that's gotten a couple of thumbs up there. All right, thank you for sharing. I'm going to go ahead and move on now and talk a little bit about asset-based pedagogies. And so there's a reference in the Classroom Essentials and in the School-Wide Essentials to culturally relevant, responsive, and sustaining pedagogy. So I just wanted to take a minute to talk about each of those theories and share with you a tool that I think integrates them very well. So first off, culturally relevant pedagogy came out of the work of Gloria Ladson Billings in the 1990s. And she studied 8 teachers who were very successful with African-American students. And she tried to figure out what was the secret to their success. Why were they so successful? And she developed through that work the concept of culturally relevant pedagogy. And there are 3 main tenets of culturally relevant pedagogy. First, that the teacher really focuses on the academic success of students, meaning there's no excuses about deficits of kids that are not going to enable them to be successful. Successful teachers of African-American students, she found, really focused on making sure that students learned and achieved at high levels. She also found that they worked on developing cultural competence, both valuing and recognizing and building upon the culture that kids brought to school, and also helping them develop access to the dominant culture in the United States. So teaching academic English, making sure kids understood how systems of power work. And then also socio-political consciousness, which is about helping kids to understand injustice in the world and teaching them how to fight for equity. So culturally relevant pedagogy does those 3 things. Around the same time, slightly later, by like 3 or 4 years, Geneva Gay put forth the idea of culturally responsive teaching, which came out of her work studying teachers who taught in ways that really connected with kids and helped kids to learn in ways that related to their culture. And her concept considers culture as a filter for learning, that you can learn better when things are presented to you in a way that makes sense from your cultural perspective. And she also talks about a notion of cultural caring, which is really reflecting an interest in the cultures and the values and the identities of individual kids and making it clear to kids that you see them as valuable and you see their culture as valuable. And then probably about 14 years or so later, Django Paris put forth the idea of culturally sustaining pedagogy, and he was building off these 2 prior. And his argument was that we need to go even further in sustaining students' cultures. So not just responding to them, but sustaining them so that kids' cultures are strengthened through school and that they see reasons for wanting to continue their culture. And he argues that we as a society need to build towards cultural plurality, meaning that in our society, we value lots of cultures and we have a way of setting up our society that draws on the strengths of different cultures. Collectively, These are referred to as culturally responsive sustaining pedagogies or asset-based pedagogies. And some of the empirical findings from research that support these. First off, as I said, Ladson-Billings developed culturally relevant pedagogy through studying 8 successful teachers of African-American students. So this work has origins in research. And since then, folks have examined, okay, if this kind of practice occurs, what kind of outcomes do we have for kids? And asset-based pedagogies have been shown to impact positive identity development for students and helping students to develop activist orientations to try to make the world a better place. So improving injustices where they see them. Asset-based pedagogies help students understand oppression, racism, and discrimination, and it helps them become committed to addressing social inequities, both as kids and as adults. We also know that these pedagogies increase student achievement, graduation rates, and reduce racial achievement gaps. And one study looked at how this kind of pedagogy can increase enrollment in AP courses when kids get into high school. So there is research showing that these pedagogies have positive outcomes. And this is another resource that I'm sharing with you today. The state of New York, their Department of Education, spent a bunch of time and resources back in 2018 and 2019, pulling together a lot of experts, including the people on the prior slides and others who study culturally relevant education, and developed the culturally responsive sustaining education framework. And there's a link to this in the resources on the agenda for today. And I use this in my courses at MSU, and I use this in some of my research and projects that I do. And they basically are arguing that there's 4 principles of culturally responsive sustaining education. And in this resource, they go through and say, what do kids need to do around these 4 principles? What do teachers need to do? What do school leaders need to do? What do district leaders need to do? What do state policymakers need to do? What do family and community members need to do? And the goal is, how do all of these people work together to create schools that are culturally responsive? And there are 4 central tenets. First is a welcoming and affirming environment. Below that is the inclusive curriculum and assessment. On the top right, high expectations and rigorous instruction. And then for educators, ongoing professional learning and support. So if you are at all interested in culturally responsive and sustaining education and promoting that work in your work, I would recommend that you consult this resource. It's got bulleted statements of like, here's what a teacher needs to do to create a welcoming and affirming environment. Here's what inclusive curriculum and assessment entails. Here's how to get high expectations and rigorous instruction. So it's a very useful tool. But you can see here that there's an element of the environment, what the curriculum's around, and then that high expectations and rigorous instruction is around the expectations, a little bit of that intangible piece of how teachers work with kids. And I think as we think about asset-based pedagogies, you can't think about that without high expectations. So I think sometimes people have a little bit of a hard time imagining or figuring out exactly what culturally responsive sustaining education looks like. So I'm going to share 2 examples that come out of my own work in the last year. And these are both examples from middle school, but you can certainly see how these would apply to a K-5 setting as well. So first up, I've been doing instructional rounds in the Kalamazoo County for the last year and a bit, training educators there to do rounds. And we were there one day and we were doing instructional rounds at a middle school. And I walked into a 6th grade classroom with a couple of other folks. It was English language arts. There were about 30 kids in the class. They were 6th graders, and they were very, very racially diverse. It was like, a United Nations of kids in this classroom. We were in there for about 20 minutes, and here's what we saw. When we first came in, there was a video interview with an author playing, and the room was totally quiet, and every kid had their eyes glued on the video. And I'm going to play that video for you now, because I want you to get a sense of the kind of learning experience that really captivated their attention. And think about what I said earlier about engagement relating to competence, autonomy, and relatedness or connectedness, and think about why this would be engaging.
Ghost voice. Well, sometimes I get the call and it just comes out of my soul. But I also have this editor named Alvina Ling at Little Brown, who sometimes will drop an idea in my head. So she thought maybe I should write about young men of color being assaulted because of racism or racial bias. And I immediately said, no, no way. She brought it up because she had heard some of the incidents that happened in my family with me raising a Black son. But by putting that note inside my soul, it grew and grew and grew. And I kept thinking about it. And then finally, one day I said, ghosts. I can write it if I can add ghosts. And it was only years later that Alvina told me she was really worried that I had thought about ghosts. But all of a sudden, Emmett Till, as well as, the contemporary murders of young Black men, came together as a whole. And it makes sense because when I was a child, that was when Emmett Till was murdered. And I remember seeing pictures of his casket. I remember the grown-ups talking about it in ways that maybe a contemporary parent might not talk about it right now to a young child. So my life had been bracketed by Emmett Till, then later the the assault of Rodney King in the LA riots when Evan was 2. And then as he grew older and became a teenager, the world became even more harsh and more set against him. And I started experiencing the worry of Evan, be safe. Evan, be careful of police. Evan, come home. So I thought it was very sad that given the course of my life, that there were still these issues that needed to be dealt with. But they've changed. And now I think there's that much more subtle sense of bias where people look at children of color and see them as bigger, more mature than they are. They see them as more problematic than they are. They're just kids, And that bias is still rooted in that early sin of slavery, still rooted in the racism that caused Emmett Till to be murdered. But it's that bias that we still must tear out. And when I am with 5th graders and 6th graders and 7th graders, I feel as though I'm with the generation that's going to change everything. I see their love, I see their empathy, their compassion for one another. And I hope my book reminds them, don't judge on externals. Remember what you were like when you were in 5th graders. So by the time they become voting citizens, by the time that they move into the world as adults, they are maybe going to help us eradicate that sensibility that just because you're a person of color, someone feels they need to call the police on you. Ghost boys.
Okay. There are so many reasons I think that example is really powerful when we're talking about culturally responsive pedagogy. And let's specifically at the end, she talks about 5th and 6th graders as social activists, which was one of the components of culturally relevant pedagogy. And she talks about the expectation that they're going to change the world. And I think if you're sitting in that classroom as a 6th grader thinking about this sense of social responsibility and agency that I can change the world, I think that is very empowering for young people at that age. I also think getting into the motivation of why an author wrote a book is something we don't often take the time to help kids understand. And I think we think a social connection to the author of the book that you're reading, like, why did she write this? I don't know if kids typically get to think about that. So I think those are a couple of the reasons that is really powerful. But I'll tell you, I was in this classroom, these kids were really, really attuned to the video. Then the teacher stopped the video and she asked students to use an electronic tool. I didn't catch what it was, but they all had laptops and there was a tool they could type into and the answers would get projected on the front of the classroom. And she had 3 questions that were really powerful. And they were along the lines of, do you agree that police have the right to shoot people? And so kids, and I think it said why. And so kids were writing in their answers and they were popping up and she was commenting on them a little bit, kind of like we've been doing with the chat. And then she said, all right, in the middle of your tables, there's a basket of a copy of Ghost books. Go ahead and take one. I'm not kidding. My eyes filled with tears. Those kids were so excited to grab that book and dig into it. I've never seen, like, they were like out of their seats trying to get those books. And then once they settled down and had their books, she played the first few pages of the book, or it's a segment from the book that she played, and I'm going to play it for you now. And it is clearly the voice of a young Black man telling his story. Let me know if you can hear it when it starts in a second here. No.
Dad. Small I look,
Can you hear it?
laid out flat, my stomach touching ground, my right knee bent and my brand new Nike stained with blood. I stoop and stare at my face, my right cheek flattened on concrete. My eyes are wide open, my mouth too. I'm dead. I thought I was bigger, tough, but I'm just a bit of nothing. My arms are outstretched like I was trying to fly like Superman. I barely turned, sprinting. Pow, pow. 2 bullets. Legs gave way. I fell flat, hard. I hit snowy ground. Ma's running. She's wailing, my boy, my boy. A policeman holds her back. Another policeman is standing over me, murmuring, it's a kid, it's a kid. Ma's struggling. She gasps like she can't breathe. She falls to her knees and screams. I can't bear the sound. Sirens wail. Other cops are coming. Did someone call an ambulance? I'm still dead, alone on the field. The policeman closest to me is rubbing his head. In his hand, his gun dangles. The other policeman is watching Ma like she's going to hurt someone. Then he shouts, stay back. People are edging closer, snapping pictures, taking video with their phones. Stay back. The policeman's hand covers his holster. More people come. Some shout. I hear my name. Jerome, it's Jerome. Still, everyone stays back. Some curse, some cry. Doesn't seem fair. Nobody ever paid me any attention. I skated by, kept my head low. Now I'm famous.
All right, I'm going to stop it there, but I just wanted to share this example with you because it was one of the best 20 minutes of instruction I've ever seen. And those kids were so invested in reading that book. And I think the setup was a large part of it. I mean, not only did they have the chance to connect with the author, but in these questions that they wrote about right before they picked up the books, they were talked about kind of the big social issues that were going to be reflected in the book. And I saw that, you know, some of you were moved as you heard the author talk about why she wrote this book. I just want to remind you that one of the reasons we read literature is to make connections and to have that human experience. And I think that this teacher was really bringing this alive for the kids in this example. The next example I want to share with you came from an interview that I did on another research project. Actually, one of my colleagues did this interview, but it's a middle school music teacher. And this is just another way of thinking about culturally responsive, sustaining education. And I'm going to play a little background music here, which is K-pop, which is Korean pop. And it just goes with the story. But here's what this teacher said. Being the music teacher, I have unique opportunities to introduce different styles of music to the school because every morning I play music throughout the PA system as the kids are coming in. I always have a purpose. I'm not just doing stuff arbitrarily. So like we started the school year off with Latin American because September to October, you have that. So every single month, I'm trying to do like a cultural theme of different music that's for that month. So like we just left like Asian Heritage Month. So I was playing, you know, Japanese, Korean K-pop, J-pop, like all kinds of stuff. It's been really cool because it seems like the kids have really been listening to the music and it's not just like background noise. I've had kids that come up to me and they're like, hey, you know that song, it's the J-pop group of blah, 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 blah. I may not know who these people are, but that again, there's that connection where I played something, it was familiar and the kids get excited about it. I'm always trying to have some kind of connection with everybody, some way, somehow, so they feel welcome. So I think that's just a fairly simple example, but just reminding you that culturally responsive sustaining education happens at the school level, and there's lots of different ways to do it. So I'm going to ask you to contribute to the chat once again. And just share your own thoughts. Why do you think these two examples engage students? We'll take about 2 minutes. I'm seeing the word connection go by a lot. I see the students can relate. It honors their identity. Somebody references mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. Appeal to things that are relevant to students and what they are thinking about. Social connectedness, the importance of that in middle school. Expecting all students to engage and connect with the world around them. They see themselves in what they're learning, reflecting current issues, and music, which just reminds me to mention that youth culture is culture. So as we think about connecting to kids' culture, youth culture is an element of that. The things that they're listening to, watching, talking about is another way to connect to their culture. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide now and ask you to take 4 minutes to brainstorm how I and the teachers with whom I work are focusing or could focus on asset-based pedagogies. 4 minutes, and if you have a birthday in November, please share a thought in the chat. I see a number of comments that reflect connections to lesson planning, which is, I think, is something that's important to remind teachers that that's the time when they can think through how they will make these connections, how they'll have opportunities to make connections. I also see a number of responses that are related to finding out about individual kids and their interests. And I'll just remind you that culture is individual. So sometimes we think about like Latino culture or African-American culture, and not everybody who is in a single culture shares the exact same cultural attributes. You can even imagine two kids in a family having very different experiences. Perhaps one spends a lot of time cooking with their grandmother and another spends a lot of time playing soccer with their uncles. And you can imagine that those two kids in the same family would have different expressions of their culture as they grow up and become adults, or even as they talk about it in school. So culture really happens at the individual level, which is why all of these comments that talk about taking time to get to know kids and their interests and their individual strengths is right on point, because culture happens at the individual level. All right, I'm going to move now into connecting what we've been talking about to asset-based coaching. And the idea here is that asset-based coaching is asset-based thinking in your work, in your coaching work with teachers. So now you're not just using asset-based thinking about kids, you're doing it with teachers, and you're thinking, what is this teacher good at? And how can I build on this teacher's strengths to develop new skills? And to help us think about this, I've pulled 2 resources. This one I didn't share with you because most of it would not be useful. And this was a study of a strengths-based leadership coaching program for women. But I thought it had this really nice paragraph that summarized what strengths-based coaching does. It says, strengths-based coaching stems from the belief that individuals can gain far more when they expend effort to build on their greatest talents than when they spend a comparable amount of time to remediate their weaknesses. The guiding principles of strength-based education are that coaches provide A, an assessment of strengths, B, individualization and tailoring to participant needs and interests, C, networking with colleagues and professionals who affirm strengths, D, deliberate application of strengths outside of the coaching program, and E, intentional development of strengths through novel experience or focused practice. And I just think that gives a nice summary of strengths-based coaching. This is a resource that I did share with you. This is a brief article from Ed Week. It's about 2 pages long, and it talks about asset-based coaching for teachers. And I'm going to read a couple of paragraphs to you that I think are really critical to inform your own thinking. Asset-based coaching is a deceptively simple but powerful approach to working with adult learners. Essentially, there are 2 predominant ways that we can think about making behavioral change. We can focus on what we're doing wrong and try to do less of it, or we can focus on what we're doing right and try to do more of it. Researchers in many fields have found that by focusing on strengths, talents, competencies, and things we're doing right, we are far more likely to make long-lasting change. Taking an asset-based or strengths perspective is an undervalued and underused approach for working with learners of all ages, and has the potential for yielding the results that many of us hope to see in schools. It's useful to understand why an asset-based approach works, and it comes back to the way our brains are wired. When we're focusing on what we're not good at, our deficiencies and areas of struggle, negative neural pathways in our brain are reinforced. The pathways that produce self-defeating statements like, I'm such a failure, this won't work, I know I'm not good at X and I've been trying to get better for many years, what's wrong with me? Why am I so bad at this? Take a moment to think about something you've tried improving in, perhaps eating healthier or getting more exercise. And notice how that internal dialogue amplifies. The majority of us are well aware of our areas of weakness, and casting more light on them creates distress. This decreases our ability to take action, learn, and see possibilities. It's not that we can't learn when it's not that we can't learn when we focus on areas for growth, but there's more struggle. We're at odds with our brain. When we focus on our strengths, we can access the positive emotions that inspire action and open us to learning. Asset-based coaching strives to magnify strengths, and what we focus on grows. In partnership with our client, we seek out what they're doing that's effective, we highlight their practices that are working, and bring to light their hidden skills. As coaches, we want to be careful that we're not doing too much pointing, because the client needs to acknowledge and embrace his strengths in order to really benefit. If a coach is always the one saying, you did that so well, then the client hasn't internalized the recognition of his strengths. I gave you the whole article today. It's a very short one. I think it's worth a read. She talks in there about an example of a teacher who's really good at connecting with other teachers and is struggling to connect with parents. So helping them to identify the skills that make them effective at connecting with their fellow teachers and applying those skills to parents as like a way to use those strengths to grow in a new area. So that's the kind of thing we're thinking about when we talk about asset-based coaching. So I want you to take 2 minutes of just quiet to yourself. Think of a teacher you're currently working with and think about one strength that teacher has and how you could use that strength to work on a needed area of growth. Take 2 minutes to just think to yourself. I'm going to ask you to share your thinking in the chat, please. How could you use a particular strength of this teacher to work on developing a particular new skill? All right, once you've shared a thought in the chat, go ahead and brainstorm. I'm going to give you 3 minutes this time because we're almost to 11:30. Brainstorm how you could incorporate more asset-based coaching in your work. If you are a December birthday, please share an idea in the chat for how you could incorporate more asset-based coaching in your work. I saw somebody asked if the chat could be shared, and I saw one of the organizers say yes. So the chat will be shared with everybody. And I really encourage you to look through it because there are some very good, very specific examples of how people use strengths to build onto them. And there were ones around, you know, I know the teacher does this, so I could use that to transfer to this area of growth. And some of those are really succinct, explicit examples that I think would be useful to people who maybe aren't quite sure of how this would play out in their own work. And even to people who are just looking for other ways to think about it. So as you're finishing adding to the chat, if you're a December birthday, I'm just going to go back to where we saw the asset-based perspectives and the essentials, as this is a way to kind of close our time together to connect back to those essentials. So as a reminder, we looked at 2 documents in the K-3 literacy essentials in enabling conditions. We saw that one of the things that helps all kids thrive is an asset orientation toward children, families, and communities. Also culturally relevant, responsive, and sustaining pedagogical approaches throughout the day. In K-3 literacy essential number 1, around motivation engagement, We saw incorporating diverse tasks and authors. That shows community assets, like part of your community is your broader cultural group. And it also is a form of culturally responsive sustaining pedagogy. We talked about collaborating with peers, which opportunities for students to show their own assets, the community assets of the people in the classroom. That's one community the students are part of. And then it's also culturally responsive and sustaining for many students. In regards to addressing community needs and drawing on affirming students' identities, again, we're looking at student assets and culturally responsive sustaining pedagogy, child-centered activities with incorporating interests and involving children in decision-making and creating a positive environment. Again, builds on kids' assets. A lot of the things you said included things like kindness, motivating others, which is great for being part of that learning community. Also shows the assets of the community in the classroom and is a facet of culturally responsive sustaining education. And then finally, the organizational climate. We said that there's a shared belief that every child can and will be successful, drawing upon assets from their families. So this is, again, student assets, family assets, community assets. When we help children identify and build on their strengths, we're identifying students' assets, and that culturally responsive and sustaining learning environment is culturally responsive and sustaining. So these ideas are throughout the essentials. And our goal here was that you'd understand a deeper understanding of what asset-based thinking is, asset-based pedagogy, asset-based coaching, how they apply to the practices, and that you'd have a chance to develop some of your own strategies. So I feel like you are walking away with those outcomes in your pocket. And thank you for enabling me to share this time with you. I will add the links to any videos I used today into the agenda for today's session and the part under my name. Once I sign off, I'll go in and add those links for you. But thank you very much.
Dr. Kristy Cooper-Stein, thank you so much for joining us today. Your presentation has added so much value to some of the work that we have been tackling since, I would say, 2020 and beyond. But specifically with the work that we've been doing with Cultivating Genius, there are so many parallels between what you honored and lifted today as we think about identities, criticality, joy, and especially genius. So thank you so much for that. We're honored to have you here today.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. I'm going to sign off.